Hi there, my name is Will Patillo, and today I'm going to be showing you how to use the visual scripting system that has recently been integrated into Unity in a way that interfaces directly with code. In the first part, I'll jump straight in and show you how to make a dialog system, because that is the simplest use case I could think of that illustrates the core concepts while also providing some genuine real-world value. Then in the second part of the video, I'm going to go over to the whiteboard and go into a little bit of theory as to when exactly it makes sense to use visual scripting versus when you should probably just be writing code. Because there's actually a lot of very objective and clear-cut reasons to use one or the other that don't seem to be very widely understood. I'm going to be putting a set of timestamps in the description on this video. Let's get started by opening up our Unity project. So here I am in a fresh new Unity project. Note that I am in version 2021.1. So if you're using this or something later, then you should be able to follow along fine. If you're earlier, note that the visual scripting system that's been brought into Unity is based off of Bolt, so if you get the Bolt plugin, it'll likely work very similar. And there's probably a similar process available if you're using Playmaker or FlowCanvas or some other visual scripting system. So anyway, though, I'm going to start off by going into the package manager to make sure that I have visual scripting present, and make sure that and then I'm searching inside of the Unity registry, and if I just search for visual scripting, then this is the one that I'll need. And it looks like I have this installed already, so if you don't, just install it and wait for that to complete. And then once you have that, you should be able to get this visual scripting graph as an option. Next thing for setting up the project, first I'm just going to get rid of this scenes folder because organizing things by type is a very bad idea. You should always organize by subject. And I'm going to just rename this scene to dialog to express its purpose. And now set up a couple of things for just basic dialog system. So I'll just have like a black background. Let's go into solid, make my background black by setting the color, and then create a little bit of UI elements. I'm just going to go straight to the built-in ones rather than pulling in TextMesh Pro, although you could certainly do that. So I'll create a little bit of text so I can see it in the scene, make this nice invisible white color, make sure that I'm going to put this right in the center of the screen and give myself a little bit more space to work with, and also centralize it that way. Actually, maybe I'll lift it up a little there. Also increase my font size to something a little bit more readable. And then next, so this will be my narration right here. And then I'm going to create a couple of buttons. We'll just make 2 of them for now. So lower this a little bit, and then create another button, and that's good enough. There's a lot of things you could do to make this look better, but that's not really the point of this exercise. Next, I'm going to create a script for DisplayDialog. And this is what is going to really control the button clicks and what gets described on the screen. So maybe I'll just create a new empty game object and just zero it out. And this is what I'm going to place the display dialog on. I'll call this a dialog here. And I'll get rid of my start and update. Set up the script, make sure that I'm having the right namespaces. We'll need to be working with the UI. And I'll just leave this for now. I'll come back to it once we get some other stuff in place. Next, I'm going to create a state machine to control this. A state machine right here. And I have 2 options. I can use a graph or an embed. Embed makes it specifically tied to the scene, whereas graph makes an asset that you could potentially reuse. In this case, we could go either way. A dialog tree is typically going to be tied to a specific conversation, and so you're probably not going to need to repeat it a bunch. But the way I'm going to be building this one, there's nothing that's going to be very scene specific, and so let's just go with the graph, just keep its flexibility. I'm going to create a new one, and I'll just call this a example dialog. Save that, and that creates this new dialog asset, which then goes into here. I can give it a name and a summary. That's not really necessary. And now I can go in and edit the graph. So the first thing, this will be my special starting state that will execute as soon as it begins. Once I'm in the graph, all I'm going to need is the onEnter state. So I can get rid of this update and exit. I could always add those back in later if I need them. And this illustrates my very first challenge. Is I want to be able to change the narration on this object right here. But rather than trying to go directly to this object and like set text right in here, I'd like to go through my script. So I'm going to start by going out from this onEnter state option, and then I'm going to look for the game object. And well, that's weird. There's like nothing in the unit options. There's supposed to be a really long list here. So if you see that error, the way to fix it is you can go into Edit and Project Settings and then click Regenerate Units. And that takes a while to go through it. But once you've done that, then you should be able to see a whole list of options, including dialog, or the thing that this state machine is attached to. And if you look at this, then we can also see that it actually has a reference to the game object and also that DisplayDialog script that we just saw. So actually it'd be great if we can just call a method from there directly. So let's go into our DisplayDialog script, and if I type in public void test, and actually I'll just go straight in and get a reference to the text field narration and say narration.text equals test successful. Now I'll go into my DisplayDialog here and give this a reference to my narration. So that way, when I call this test, then this new text will switch to that test successful value. So back inside of my state graph, I double-clicked on there, go into the enter state. I go out here, and now it's showing different options for some reason, but not to be thrown off by that. I can just go to Codebase, Global Namespace, and DisplayDialog. And we'll look on here and scroll down through it, and we'll see that that test is actually not there. And the reason for it is that we need to actually regenerate the units all over again, which is really tedious and kind of annoying. So instead, we're going to use a little bit of a shortcut for now until we've locked down what methods we actually want to use. And I'm going to look for a something called SendMessage. Okay, I have a component SendMessage, method name, and just like that. And then if I type in test right here, now if I run the scene, we can see test successful shows up in this narration. Now let's suppose I want to, rather than just hard coding a value to put in here, say public void set text string value, and say narration.text equals value. So now we're sending in an argument rather than just hard coding it. So now I can do something very similar. So rather than just using this send message with no arguments, I can go into look for send message again and use the version that has a method name and also a value. So I'll connect this to the onEnter state, use the method name setText because that's what that's the exact right there, and then I can drag in a value and look for a string literal, and so let's say setting the text. Okay, like that. And I just want to select this. Oh, I can't. Guess I can't move them separately. And I run it, and once again, it is setting the text. However, when I'm running this, I'm not going to want to just set this text. I also want to set the options descriptions on both of these buttons. Now, I could try to have a method that has public void SetNode, and then ask for a narration value, maybe another string for option 1, another string for option 2. But that's assuming that I'm always going to have exactly 2 options and nothing else. I'm going to really want something that's a bit more extensible than that. At the very least narration, but maybe also a background image, an open-end number of buttons, and so on. So I need a more flexible data type. So I'm going to skip straight ahead to using a scriptable object for setting a node. And for that, I'll create a new C# script, and I'll call this dialog node. Open this up. And just our regular scriptable object kind of stuff. So create asset menu, menu name equals, and let's give this a place for it, dialog and node. And then I'll inherit from ScriptableObject instead of monobehavior. And then this, for now, I'll just have a string for narration, public string option 1. And actually, you know what? I'm going to just skip that. Go straight to getting a array of strings. So I'll just say options. While I'm about it, I'm just going to go ahead and also enable or disable buttons depending on whether there's content for it. So that means getting a reference to the game objects of the buttons as well as the text on them. So I'll create for that a serializable public class option, and this will have a reference to the button game object as well as the text component, the description. Okay, and I'll just go ahead and then create an array of options up here. Serialized field, option, options. In my dialog graph, I can list out 2 options, and and there's some errors going on. These are not showing up because they are not public. Oh, and actually this could be a struct since I'm just using it for pure data. So they're a little bit more efficient. So now my options are up here, and so my first one, I can get the button game object and then also its text element. Do the same thing for the other button. Okay. And next, when I set node, instead of taking in just a string or multiple arguments, I can take in a dialog node and call it the node. And then I can set the narration.text is equal to the node.narration. That one's pretty straightforward. Then I can loop through all of my options and set them active, inactive, and also their content. So So int I equals 0, I less than options.length, I plus plus. So first I'll determine if the option is active by checking if I is less than node dot options dot length. So right here I can say options I dot button dot set active and set that to option active. And then also if not option active, we'll just continue. And so all the rest of the stuff won't error out. And if it is, and if we continue on, then we know that it is active, and so we can safely say that options I dot description dot text is the same as the node dot options I. All right. Now back in our state graph, actually before that, we'll have to create a couple of these nodes. So I'll just start by going into dialog, create a node, and I'll just call it the start. And I'll put in some text for the narration. It begins. And I'll start out by giving this one two options, option 1 and option 2. Okay. So that's our data. And now when we're sending a message, instead of this string, we can send it a scriptable object. Right there. Scriptable object literal. And I can drag in start right into that spot. So now we're sending these contents via SendMessage to find this SetNode. So if I run this, oh, we are getting an error. What is this? Attempted to access a missing member. Let's see, what is that about? Is everything set correctly here? We have a narration, button, text, and so on. Let's take a look at our graph. Oh, right, because we're trying to call setText when really we should be calling SetNode, because setText was expecting just a string, whereas SetNode is expecting the scriptable object. So let's try that again. And we can see all of our data is in. We have the it begins, option 1, option 2. And just to test that little dynamic functionality, let's say if I get rid of option 2 right there, then if I run this again, now we can see there is just one option. So that is working. So that's sending information out from the script graph out over to your code. Now, one thing I'm going to change that I'd like a little bit better is I would like to actually be able to directly call SetNode without using SendMessage. The reason for it, two things I don't really like about SendMessage. One is you have to type in exactly this method name, which, as you've seen already, is very error prone. And secondly, the way SendMessage works is it looks for any method with this name in every component on this object using reflection, which is very inefficient. So what I'm going to do here is, now that I know what my interface to DisplayDialog is, this SetNode is pretty flexible, because if my needs ever change, I could always just change what is in the scriptable object without having to change its type. So I can get rid of these two methods earlier and be just fairly confident this is the one that I need. And Now that that's in place, now would be a good time to go into the project settings and regenerate my units. Once that process is finished, I can close this, and hopefully now I can say get rid of this send message, and instead go into dialog, display dialog, and I can see this set node as an option right here. And now I can just go straight in and place start into that directly. So not typing in magic strings right here, and also one less node on my graph. So let's see if that works. And yes, it does. Great. So that covers my going from the script over to code. Next, I want to be able to have these button presses, if I actually click on these buttons, to trigger transitions in the script graph. Before that, though, I'll need to actually create some new states. So I'm going to start off by right-click and create a script state. And then I'm going to connect the start to this script state by creating a new transition and clicking there. And so now we have a transition between the two. I can also rename the script state to, I'll just call this option 1. And go in here, delete some of this stuff, and on enter to actually go ahead and create some data to put in here. Option 1, and just say in the narration you have selected 1, and I'll just not really put any options in it just yet. Okay, you have selected option. I've selected 1. Now I can go into this dialog, DisplayDialog, SetNode, and throw option 1 into there. So that's created this new state. Now I need to actually define this transition. Something needs to trigger it, and I would like something code related to be there. Well, the first option I can have is if I go into my scene and I go to my button, I can say on click, and I can go directly to my dialog state machine. And I notice right in here there is an option for trigger Unity event. So I'm just going to keep this, since this is all string based, I'm going to make something very simple and just say 1 and just use that number and nothing else. So it's very unlikely that I'll type that wrong. And once that's in place, I can go into my script graph, go off the back here, and search for Unity event. And there it is. And this is going to be expecting a string, so I just put a 1 right there. So now when I press this button and I send a 1 to the state machine, this Unity event will fire, which will trigger this transition. So if I run this, I see this option, I click here, and I say you have selected 1, and now I am in a new state. And that works all right, but maybe I want some more stuff to happen when I click here, beyond just a state transition. Maybe something displays on the screen, or maybe I just want to bring everything in controlled into code. So I'm actually going to add a new method to the script, which fortunately this will not require a rebuild, and say public void select option. And just to insert a little bit of sanity into this project, I'm going to use an int here. So int index. And then I'm going to send out this string through a Unity event and basically simulate how the button's working. Now, Unity events by default can't actually send strings, so I'm just going to extend Unity a little bit so that they can. Fortunately, this only takes 1 line of code. So create a new C# script. I'm going to call this Unity events. And actually, I don't really write these scripts like this when I'm working professionally. I just have like one Unity event scripts with all the various different types, and I just carry that with me from project to project, so I don't have to write this over and over. But I'll just show how it's done. So I'm going to need to be using system and also using Unity engine.events. And then I can just say serializable public class, and I'll just call this a string event because it's a Unity event sending a string. It inherits from Unity event, and it is type string. That's those brackets, and then just open and close curly braces. That's all you need. And having this anywhere in my project essentially allows me to go somewhere like in DisplayDialog and to say serialized field, no, not serializable, serialized field, string event, and let's call this output selection. Okay, or actually, I'll just call it select. And now in select option, I can say select.invoke, and I'll convert this index into .toString, which is what its receiver will be expecting. Now on the button, rather than going to the state machine, I can go to my DisplayDialog, select option, and type in a number. And because this is an int, I can't just put in an ASD or something weird input like that. So there's a little bit of input validation there. So this takes a 1, converts it to a string, and then sends it over here. And so this would work exactly the same as before. On this, click option 1, and no, that is not working because there is some sort of error. What is the issue here? So let's see. There's a button, select option, select.invoke. Oh, one thing that's going to be a problem is I actually need to connect this select over to my state machine. I forgot about that. So state machine, and then that's going to go straight to trigger Unity event. Note that now it is here a dynamic string because it could be sending a 1, a 2, it could be sending anything through this. Before it was down in the static properties. Okay, let's try that again. Option 1, and you have selected 1. All right, great. Now just get a little bit of practice. We're going to make a second option. And I can save a bit of time by taking this and copying it and pasting. Oh, one little gotcha to be aware of, don't copy paste the start node and put that in multiple places, otherwise your graph is going to try to start in multiple places at once, and that gets kind of confusing. All right, so now created this new state, we call it option 2, and I'm going to create another option here like that, and say you have selected 2. All right, great. And then that's going to go into my dialog node. And then lastly, I'll need to create another one of these. So actually, can I just copy this? No, I can't. But I can copy this. And so create a transition, paste, connect this here, and this time I'm going to use 2 that transitions to state 2. And this button will now be able to go to my dialog and DisplayDialog and select option 2. And these, it's okay to be static because this button should always pick the first option. This button should always pick the second. It's just how these are defined in the graph that determines what that means. So if I run this, I click option 2, I've selected 2. If I run it again and I select 1, and I've selected 1. Now let's actually test this out a little bit further. I'm going to branch this out a bit more, and I'm going to have 1 have the option of going back to start, and 2 have the option of going to state 3. So let's maybe make a new transition, and actually I can just maybe can I paste? Oh, no, never mind. I'll just get that Unity event. Unity event. I'll look for 1, and so if I'm in state 1 and I receive a 1, then I go back to start, and then that means I'm going to need to have at least one option in element 1. So I can call this return to start. Let's test that out. So out here, I select 1, then I have the option to return to start, and that takes me back here. And then lastly, one more state in this. I'm going to create an option 3, and and then go to 2, give some text here, continue to 3, and then 3 doesn't need anything. I'm going to call this game over. Okay, and then back in my graph, I go to 2, copy and paste, call this 3, create a transition, and look for my Unity event. And this again is just going to be searching for 1 because there's only one option in this node. So go through here. Once again, 1 can go back to start. 2 has the option to go to 3. Oh, and nothing happens when I click on that. Something must be amiss here. Let's see, what could that be? So I have an option 1, it goes to 3. 3 is game over. State graph, if I'm in state 2, then 1 should trigger the transition over to 3. Oh, and that's the problem because I was in state 3, but I was displaying the option 2 stuff. So let's bring that in. So if I go to 2, you select 3, continue to 3, game over. Practical lessons over, time for theory. So in the last part of this video, I'd like to just discuss a little bit as to when it makes sense to use visual scripting versus when it'd be better to just write things in code. And there are 2 core considerations here. The first one, which is most commonly discussed, is accessibility to designer. Visual scripting is exposed. They have a lot of control points, they can move things around, very easily see all the stuff that's going on. On the other hand, code, by its nature, is going to be hidden to the designer. And one of these is not necessarily better than the other. For example, if something is going to be tweaked and balanced a lot through testing, then it's going to be good to have it exposed so that they can change it easily without asking you to change something. Whereas if something's a lot more fragile process that you don't want someone just messing around with, then you're probably better off just keeping it hidden. But actually, of the 2 considerations I'm going to talk about, this is the much smaller one, even though it gets a lot more attention, because there are a lot of ways to expose or hide functionality from a designer. You can just put things in the inspector, you can have stuff in ScriptableObjects, or some ways to expose it. You can make things read-only or put them in folders that are marked do not read. I mean, there are a lot of options here. So yeah, I mean, this is one thing, but that's actually the smaller item. The other thing to consider is the nature of the problem that is actually being expressed. And this is the much more important consideration. Visual scripting is, by its nature, very much set up to express relationships between different concepts. Code, on the other hand, is much more set up to illustrate processes. So what I mean by both of these, like with the relationships kind of case, state machines are a very good case in point. Like when we're going through that little dialog system a moment ago, you could see just from a bird's eye view all the connections between all the different states, which ones transitions to which. You can see that there's a loop. You can see that 1, 2, and 3, like the start, option 2 and option 3, just kind of flow out from each other in a direct line. And that's all visible right there at a glance. And you don't have to like follow some breadcrumb trail of scriptable objects or code references or anything like that. It's much easier to see how everything relates together when it's expressed in a visual sort of way, because you just have that map that isn't really there in text. On the other hand, in the code case of expressing processes, Visual scripting is not so good for that, and it's much easier to just have it in writing. I mean, think about it. If you look at a cookbook and you look at the recipes, they could have drawn things out in whole maps of node networks. Like we can imagine, say, if we were just trying to describe the process of making tea through a visual scripting sequence. Just erase all this. And say you start by filling a kettle with water. So we'd have a fill command, and that's a node. And then this needs like a couple of arguments. So it's going to need a source of water, and then also, which is going to connect to this fill node, and then it's also going to need a container, so that's going to be its kettle, and that's also going to connect to the fill node. And then after it's filled, then we'll need to heat it. So let's say heat over here. That's another node, and then this is going to connect in a chain. Oh, actually, we should probably say that there's a start over here and connect that also into fill. Fill goes to heat. And then heat needs to know about the kettle. It also needs to have a heat source. So maybe your stove can go down here, and that's going to connect in. And and then also you need a temperature, which is going to be of place in a high temperature as the value of that, and then that goes over to heat, and then the heat goes over to a kind of a wick. I mean, you can see already this is insane. Like, nobody writes recipes this way for a reason, and because it doesn't illustrate the fundamental process that it's describing in the most direct possible way. Just writing it out, a series of steps, is much clearer. Now, granted, people are different. Some people are super visual and maybe would find this easier to read than a sequence of instructions. Maybe some people really prefer text and would rather see a relationships graph just written out. For the most part, though, it's not about which one is better or which one has a lower barrier to entry or any of that kind of stuff. It's just that visual scripting and code-based solutions have different strengths and weaknesses and make them more or less suited to different kinds of problems. So the key is knowing what sort of thing you're trying to solve and choosing your tools relevant to the task. Now, the tricky thing is a lot of tasks are a mix, especially like in game development, where having like all kinds of challenges all grouped together and everything has to work as one. That's why it's really essential to have both of them work together. That's it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed it and learned something, all the usual stuff, like, share, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.